Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the study of the book of Genesis. Today is Genesis chapter 10, verses 1 through 32. This is episode number 20 in our study of the book of Genesis. We have reached the end of Noah's life in the previous episode, and now we are looking at the descendants of Noah, his sons, and then the descendants of his sons. Really, the book of Genesis chapter 10, which we're going to look at all of this, but really it is the table of nations, because this is really the forming of nations. We're going to read through this fairly quickly. There's a lot of genealogy here that most people would just skip over, but really a lot of this leads to the formation of a lot of the Middle East, of Europe, of Africa, of Asia. All of this descends out of the sons of Noah. So let's look at this together, getting into Genesis chapter 10, verse 1. As we get into this, I want to note something that the theologian William Albright said. He said the 10th chapter of Genesis stands absolutely alone in ancient literature, without a remote parallel, even among the Greeks, where we find the closest approach to a distribution of peoples in genealogical framework. The Table of Nations in chapter 10 remains an astonishing, accurate document. So what he's saying in this is the only document that is known that really talks about the establishment of the world and where the families and the nations of the world came out of, where the distribution of people around the geological framework actually happened. So this is an important chapter, even though there's a lot of names and a lot of information to go through. It starts this way. Now this is the genealogy of the sons of Noah. Noah had three sons. He had Shem, he had Ham, and he had Japheth. And sons were born to them after the flood. So there were more sons that were born after the flood, but these are the three sons that were a part of the flood. So this is the genealogy of the sons of Noah. Now, this marks a transition in the book of Genesis, and Moses is the one who wrote the book of Genesis out of, most likely it was compiled documents that he had been given, stories that had been passed to him. But he had collected these books and or these documents, and he wrote them into what we know as the book of Genesis. And these were the sons of Noah, the sons that were born to them after the flood. So life went on after the flood. Let's look at the sons of Japheth. The sons of Japheth were Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshach, and Tyrus. Now, these are what are going to be known as the Indo-European people. They're going to stretch from India to the shores of Western Europe. They really are going to be linked by a lot of linguistic similarities that often seem invisible to just lay people, but they're more often obvious to the linguist. So you're going to see, if you look at patterns of language, you're going to see connections in many patterns of language because of these people groups that were connected. So the sons of Japheth will be from India all the way into Europe, into Western Europe primarily. For example, Gomer was most likely the Germanic people who came into Western Europe. These include the original French and Spanish and Celtic settlers even. You have Magog, Tubal, Meshach. These are going to be areas of Turkey, and even stretching into farther north of Turkey into the Russian peoples. Madai, this is going to be what is now Iran and Iraq. And also the peoples of India also came from a branch of this family. And then Javan, this is going to be the ancient Greeks, who were the seafaring Greeks that are going to be described in Genesis chapter 10, verse 5. So these were the sons of Japheth, the Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshach, and Tyrus. Now the sons of Gomer, which were one of the sons of Japheth, were Ashkenaz, Rephath, and Togarmah. Now, Togarmah is also part of where's modern-day Turkey. Ashkenaz is the people who settled north of Judea in what we call the Fertile Crescent. And then he says the sons of Javan were Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, Dodanim. From these, the coastland peoples of the Gentiles were separated into their lands, everyone according to his language, according to the families, into their nations. So all of these, it shows the ways that the world is being distributed after the time of Noah. Again, This is the only document that really shows and really gives us a clue as to how the ancient world began to be established and where all of these people groups would move. And I want to show you a little map that deals with that. So if you look at the map, you're going to see in this map some of the different regions. You have to the north, the very north is Rosh, and that is modern day Russia. You have Magog, which is all of the Stan nations. That's the Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, all of these things. And you can even throw Pakistan into that mix well. Then you have the Persian area. You have Meshach and Tubal and Gomer and Togarmah, and those are the modern day Turkey. You have the people around Put and Kush. Now, Put is modern day Algeria and Libya. You have Ethiopia, which is also known as Kush in the Bible. So you have the separation of these lands that are beginning to happen, and you can see how the spread takes place across this region, across this area. Many of the end times events, it is being referred to as people that are coming from the lands of Rosh and Magog and Persia and Meshach and Tubal and Gomer and Togarmah and Kush and Put. These are all the areas that are represented in the end times events. If you want to know more about that, go to the Revelation Bible study that I do on Sundays. But this is where these nations are coming from. And in the book of Genesis chapter 10, this is the origin of those nations as they're being split into different regions and different areas, each according to the languages that they have. Now we're going to look at the descendants of Ham, another one of the sons of Noah. The sons of Ham were Kush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. Now, again, we just saw where those places were. Kush and Put, those are Africa. These developed into the modern day African regions, an African area. We have the areas of Mizraim and Canaan. Now, Canaan would have been just north or just near where the land of Israel is. In fact, the Israelites had to drive out the Canaanites from the land, though they didn't actually do it. That was in the same area of where Israel was. So again, go back to the map, and now we see Kush, which would be where modern day Ethiopia is. So that would be the Kush, Ethiopia, Sudan, that area. That's the area of Kush. We have the area of Put, that's Libya and Algeria. We have the nations of Mizraim and Canaan, which are going to be more located where Israel is. So we have the spreading out of the people groups from this region. So Israel really looks to be the center of the world, or all of the events are taking place around the Israel to Egypt area, and out of this region is where everybody spread. So this is really the origins of Noah's family. This is where Noah's family spread out around the world. Now we're going to see the sons of Kush. Now Kush was one of the sons of Ham, so this is a grandchild of Noah. The sons of Kush were Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Rama, and Sabekta, and the sons of Rama were Sheba and Dedan. Again, if you have some Bible literature knowledge, you're going to recognize a lot of these names, because these are names that are often associated with end times, or these are nations that warred with Israel. So Kush and Put and Dedan, those are nations that get brought up. Kush begot Nimrod, so this would have been the great-grandchild of Noah. He began to be a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. And beginning of his kingdom was Babel. Now where's Babel? Well, we'll look at that in just a moment. Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. From that land he went to Assyria and built Nineveh. We know the story of Nineveh, the Ninevites, where Jonah would go. God wanted him to go. Jonah didn't want to go, but he ultimately went. Rehoboth, Calah, and Rezin, between Nineveh and Calah. That is the principal city. So all of these things are important when it comes to understanding how the world began to form after the time of Noah. Again, enemies of God, enemies of Israel, enemies of the end times events, the Arab peoples coming out of this that will likely be forming the beastly empire that will come against Israel, but this is the foundation of those places. Well, let's look at this a little bit more closely. So we mentioned Babel. Where is Babel? Babel, the Tower of Babel, that would have been the Babylonian Empire. You can see it here with this little tower that is on the map. That would be what is modern-day Iran in the Persian area. This modern-day Iran, who had the Tower of Babel, the city of Babylon, that would have been located in this place. And that was an important event that we're going to get to in the story of Genesis. Again, they're to the east of the nation of Israel, but these are all nations that will war with God's people, because God says that that's what's going to happen, but they have a hatred of God's people. Well, now we have the sons of Mizraim. Let's look at the sons of Mizraim, which are going to be, again, continuing to carry on and carry along the tradition of these descendants of Noah. Mizraim begot Ludan, and so he also begot Anamim, Leabim, Naphtahim, Pathrusim, Casluhim, from whom came the Philistines. Now, you know the Philistine story. We have the Philistines that would battle against Israel. We had the great story of David and Goliath. David fighting against Goliath, who was part of the Philistines. So they would war with Israel. And then we have the sons of Canaan. Canaan begot Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth, and the Jebusite, the Amorite, and the Girgashite, the Hivite, the Arkite, the Sinite, the Aravite, the Zimrite, and the Hamathite. Afterward, the families of the Canaanites were dispersed, and the border of the Canaanites was from Sidon as you go toward Gerar. As far as Gaza, you've heard of the Gaza Strip. There it is, comes right from there. Then you go towards Sodom and Gomorrah and Admah and Zeboim, and as far as Lasha. And so again, these are the spreading out. Now, many people believe the Oriental people would have descended from the Sinites, just so you make that little bit of a connection there as well. And so we see the spread of these people. These were the sons of Ham, according to their families, according to their languages, in the lands and in their nations. So that's how the descendants of Ham were dispersed. Now we have the descendants of Shem. The descendants of Shem, it says this, and the children were also born to Shem, the father of all the children of Eber, the brother of Japheth the elder. The sons of Shem were Elam, Asher, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram. And so the sons of Aram were Uz. You remember Job. If you remember his story, Job came from the land of Uz. That's what it says in Job chapter 1, verse 1. So we have the sons of Aram were Uz and Hul and Gaither and Mash. Arphaxad begot, and these names are just crazy, but trying the best here. But Arphaxad begot Selah, and Selah begot Eber. To Eber were born two sons. The name was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided. His brother's name was Joktan. Joktan begot Elomdad, Shelpa, and Hazar Mavith, Jerah, Hadoram, Uzal, Diklah, Obal, Abimelech, Sheba, Ophir, Havilah, and Johab. All of these were the sons of Joktan, and their dwelling place was from Mesha as you go towards Sirpha, the mountain of the east. And so that is the way that the lands were spread, the people were spread, and that's how the modern day world began to be in existence. Now, languages would have been connected, languages would have been carried, there would be connections, and that's why you see connections in certain languages, because they come out of the same root. The same root, they may have variations of languages, but there's a similar root. For example, English and Spanish is very similar in the roots. You can often understand Spanish by looking at it, because there's a lot of similarities between the English and the Spanish language, because they have the same roots. All of this would have been carried out at this time as they spread the world out, and the nations were going out, or the peoples were going out to form the nations of the world. Well, a couple final verses. These were the families of the sons of Noah according to their generations in their nations. And from these the nations were divided on the earth after the flood. So Martin Luther about this said this. Hence, one must consider this chapter of Genesis as a mirror in which to discern that we human beings are, namely, creatures so marred by sin that we have no knowledge of our own origin, not even of God himself, our Creator. Unless the Word of God reveals these sparks of divine light to us from afar, this knowledge of Holy Scripture reveals to us. Those who are without them live in error, uncertainty, and boundless ungodliness, for they have no knowledge about who they are and whence they came. Well, that's the story of the way that the families spread out, and that's the important thing to know from chapter 10. I know it's a lot of names and a lot of words and a lot of things, but there's reasons behind this. God is giving a roadmap of the nations and the way the nations came into being. There's no other document in the world that describes the way nations came into being like the description of the Bible, and how all of these can trace back to the story of Noah and the flood. Now, why would so many generations or so many nations have a flood story in their histories? Because the flood story would have passed from Noah to his sons, to his grandsons and great-grandsons, and they would have taken that story with them as they're going out over the world in order to settle the world. Now, Genesis chapter 11, we come to that famous story that is the Tower of Babel, and we're going to look at that next time. But we know where Babel was because we looked at it on the map. It was where we look at modern-day Iran today, modern-day Babylonian location. That is where the Tower of Babel is going to occur, and this is going to be how God then scattered all of these people. So really the story of the Tower of Babel happened right prior to chapter 10, and then in chapter 10 everybody scattered out abroad over the face of the earth, which is what chapter 11 is going to tell us. And in chapter 11 we're going to start looking at the line of Adam through Shem to Abram. So what we're getting to is the time of Abram. So remember, in our history, we have 1,000 years from creation to Noah. Then we have 1,000 years that occurred from Noah to the story of Abram, and Abram will start popping up here as we get to the end of chapter 11. So between chapters, between really chapter 6 and chapter 11, there's 1,000 years of history. Between chapter 1 and about chapter 6, there's 1,000 years of history. So in the first really 12 chapters of the book of Genesis, 2,000 years of time has taken place. We have a lot of information there that are a lot of things there that we don't have information on, so we don't know exactly what happened during that time. But the Bible gives us a wonderful clue that the flood happened and the world was scattered, and the world was scattered as a result of the Tower of Babel experience that we're going to learn about in our next session. Well, thanks for joining me today. Thanks for sticking with me through this. I know it's a lot of names, it's a lot of history, but it's important to know as we move forward. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you back here next time.